I used to think that if I could just please everyone, I would be loved, that kindness, sacrifice, and endurance were the path to happiness. So I tried so hard, smiling even when I was breaking inside, saying yes when all I wanted was to say no, living up to expectations that weren't mine, quietly crossing out my dreams, one by one, just to be accepted, just to not disappoint anyone, until one day, in what seemed like a meaningless moment, I looked at myself in the mirror and no longer recognized the person staring back. That's when the first question echoed, but what about me? Have I ever been chosen? From that moment, the journey began, the journey inward, the journey of facing the truth and gradually choosing myself, not out of selfishness, but with the courage to live authentically. And on that journey, I discovered something vital. When you choose yourself, the world begins to change. In today's reflection, we'll explore 6 profound spiritual stages you will go through when you begin to choose yourself, a journey that isn't easy, but one that can completely liberate you from a life borrowed from others. 1. The silent collapse within. There comes a moment you can't quite explain, but you feel it clearly. A crack begins to spread from within. There is no loud explosion, no visible tragedy, but the collapse is quiet and deep. One day, you wake up and realize you've been living someone else's life. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And many of us are living exactly like that. We wear masks to please others. We say yes when our hearts are screaming no. We sacrifice the smallest pieces of ourselves, time, emotions, dreams, believing it will make us lovable, accepted, and validated. But in truth, those are fragments of our soul that we abandon day after day. This collapse is not the end. It's the wake-up call, the moment when the neglected self, long silenced and buried, finally demands to be seen. You may feel a void, an unshakable anxiety, a vague sadness you can't explain, but that is your true voice, whispering just one thing: look at me. In Jungian analytical psychology, this moment marks the beginning of individuation, the sacred path back to your authentic self, no longer dictated by societal expectations or family conditioning. It is a spiritual turning point few are brave enough to face. Imagine standing before a mirror, not to adjust your appearance, but to see into your soul. You meet your own eyes and realize you've never truly asked yourself what you want. You've never lived a life that was truly your own. This isn't a weakness, it's the first sign of awakening. The moment you begin to separate from old roles, borrowed beliefs, programmed ways of living, the moment you finally ask the one question you've avoided your whole life: what if, just once, I chose myself? Set aside one quiet evening, turn off your phone, take a blank sheet of paper and write, what do I truly want? Don't force an answer, just listen. This silent collapse within is not your downfall, it is the doorway back to yourself. 2. The resistance of others when you begin to change. One of the most surprising and painful parts of choosing your authentic self is how others react. You assume that living more truthfully, more sincerely, will be met with applause. But it isn't. The truth is, those who were comfortable with your compliant version won't easily welcome your real one. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege comes at a price. Being misunderstood, criticized, or even abandoned when you begin to say no to the things you used to tolerate. When you stop pleasing everyone and start setting healthy boundaries. Some will label you selfish, ungrateful, or say, "You've changed." But in truth, you haven't changed. You've simply stopped trading away your soul in exchange for artificial peace. The issue isn't you. The issue is, your transformation forces others to face themselves. They're confronted with the way they once controlled you, projected their expectations onto you, without truly considering your feelings. And not everyone has the courage to face that. So instead of facing the truth, they resist. That resistance takes many forms. A close friend turning cold, a family member mocking your newfound clarity, coworkers whispering that you've become difficult. But don't react hastily, because in truth, they are wrestling with their own fear. The fear that if you can live honestly, they might have to do the same, and they're not ready yet. Hold your ground. This early loneliness is a test, but also a filter. It reveals who stays for the real you. Don't return to old roles just to feel accepted. Remember, authentic relationships never require you to sacrifice your essence. You weren't born to be in everyone's comfort zone. You were born to become your whole self. and those who are meant to stay will understand that without being asked. Free liberation from the fear of being judged. There is something invisible, yet it governs nearly our entire life. The fear of being judged. It begins when you're young, when you're scolded for being disobedient, not like others, weird, or not good enough. And over time, you learn to edit yourself to fit into others' expectations, choosing a career your parents approve of, dressing according to trends, speaking like you're playing a role, just to be accepted. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists. The more you try to please others, the further you drift from your true self, and the more trapped you become in the fear of judgment." But here's the beautiful truth. The moment you begin to choose yourself, that fear starts to dissolve. You no longer need to be the ideal child, the flawless employee, or the model citizen society expects. Instead, you give yourself permission to simply be you. You may not be universally liked, but you'll feel a profound relief from no longer having to pretend. At first, this liberation won't feel entirely pleasant. You may feel disoriented when you realize that many past compliments came only because you knew how to perform. You may feel empty when you're no longer driven by external validation, but eventually, you'll feel something unmistakable: inner peace. You begin to speak your truth, act on what you believe, and live in a way that feels right to you. Regardless of who's watching or who understands, you wake up in the morning without that tightness in your chest. You decline an invitation that doesn't align with you and feel no guilt. You sit silently, knowing you don't owe anyone an explanation. These are the signs of true freedom. Try living just one day without being governed by the thought, "What will people think?" Each time you're about to act, ask yourself, "Am I doing this because I genuinely want to, or because I fear being judged?" If the answer is fear, pause, because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing what's right in spite of fear. Once you're no longer bound by the gaze of others, you don't just become authentic, you begin to live fully. 4. The miraculous alignment, when the world begins to respond to your true self. Have you ever had the feeling that, when you dared to do something truly authentic, even something seemingly small like declining a meetup, changing your hairstyle, or simply speaking your truth, suddenly, everything began to shift? Carl Jung called this phenomenon synchronicity, meaningful coincidences. It's when the universe begins to respond to your inner alignment. When you choose yourself, everything starts to rearrange, not according to your will, but according to the new frequency you're emitting. You start to meet people who resonate with the real you, people who don't require you to impress or perform, but walk beside you to grow. Together, opportunities begin to emerge at just the right time. A job offer, a relationship, a new career path, things that were never visible before. Why? Because you hadn't yet become your true self to attract what truly belonged. Alignment doesn't come from begging the world to change. It comes from being radically honest with yourself. When you stop playing roles, your energy becomes clear, and the universe responds with astonishing precision. For example, a woman spent 15 years playing the role of the ideal wife, suppressing her passion for writing, until one day, she chose to step out of that role, not with drama or rebellion, but simply by writing each morning, as a quiet promise to herself. 6 months later, a friend stumbled upon her journal entries and introduced her to an editor. 3 years later, she published her first book. That's not magic, that's alignment. Start paying attention to the meaningful coincidences in your life. Who's showing up lately? What themes keep repeating like a whisper from the universe? These are not accidents, they are signals. You are beginning to live your truth, and the world has started to notice. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And when you finally touch that truth, life ceases to be a string of random events. Everything begins to fall into place. 5. The initial loneliness and the unexpected gift that follows. Not everyone says it aloud, but the truth is, choosing yourself can feel incredibly lonely. Not because you're wrong, but because you're changing, and the world around you hasn't yet caught up. When you begin to say no to the things you once said yes to. When you start stepping away from relationships that no longer nourish you, or simply begin living in alignment with your true emotions, a silence appears. Conversations begin to feel flat. People who were once close start to drift, and you'll find yourself standing in the middle of a strange quiet. This is the testing moment of the individuation journey. Carl Jung once said, "The first step to enlightenment is disillusionment." The first light of awakening is not inspiration, but disillusionment. You realize you've lived far too long for others. And now, as you return to yourself, not everyone is willing to walk beside you. But here's what you must understand. Loneliness is not the end. It's the first doorway to the greatest gift of all, when your life is no longer filled with shallow conversations or performative roles. You begin to hear the true voice inside you. You remember what once made you happy. You return to simple things, writing in a journal, taking walks for no reason, sitting in silence without feeling empty. You begin to love your own presence. And then, somehow, you no longer feel lonely. You feel free. A small example. A man, after his divorce, believed his life had fallen into a black hole. But without the burden of pleasing others, he returned to painting, something once dismissed as pointless. 2 years later, his work was featured in a gallery. But more importantly, he said, "For the first time, I feel truly alive." Do not fear loneliness. Enter it as you would an empty room, a space where you are free to repaint the most honest portrait of yourself. It is the sacred space where new, purer, and more aligned things are born. Carl Jung called that moment the meeting with the self. And sometimes, that meeting only happens when all the noise outside has faded away. 6. The wholeness that comes from within. In a world that constantly makes us feel not enough, not smart enough, not beautiful enough, not successful enough, to stop and accept yourself as you are can feel like giving up. But in truth, that is the greatest leap in consciousness you'll ever take. Carl Jung once said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." True wholeness doesn't come from erasing parts of yourself, but by embracing and integrating all of you. This is the next step in the journey, when you stop trying to become the version of yourself someone else wants, and begin gathering each piece of who you are, your light and your shadow, and welcome them back into a unified whole. You stop denying your past mistakes. You stop feeling ashamed of your wounds. You stop chasing external standards. Instead, you look at yourself gently, honestly, and you say, "I am enough." Strangely, the moment you stop trying to become someone else, you begin to shine the brightest. An example, a woman who spent half her life trying to become the ideal wife according to society. Successful, devoted, patient, but always felt like something was missing. One day, she dared to release that old identity and became an amateur artist. No one applauded her, but she was happy. She wrote poetry, planted flowers, painted her feelings, and lived more deeply than ever before. That is the kind of wholeness that comes from within. It needs no validation, no applause, only the quiet fullness of each breath, each day, each choice. Set aside time each day to sit with yourself, not to fix, but to listen. Ask, am I living in alignment with who I really am? Am I chasing what I truly desire, or just performing to be accepted? You'll begin to realize, peace isn't found in what you accomplish, but in the courage it takes to simply be yourself, fully. Choosing yourself isn't about becoming perfect. It's about being whole in all your imperfections. And that is when you become truly powerful. Not because you are free from pain, but because you've stopped running from who you are. According to Carl Jung, the journey of individuation is the path each of us must walk. Not to become someone new, but to return to who we truly are. And sometimes, the clearest sign of maturity is having the courage to let go of an old role, even when no one applauds the final scene. Personally, I believe this. Choosing yourself is a quiet revolution. It doesn't need noise or declarations, but it brings about the deepest kind of transformation. It demands that you face the fear of being left behind, the silence of solitude, the disorientation of letting go. But beyond it all is a life that is real, free, authentic, and whole. So if you're standing at a crossroads, wondering, is it worth it to live in my own way? I just want to say, yes, absolutely, because no one else can live your life but you. If these words resonate with you, leave a comment and share your personal experience, because your story might just be the first spark for someone else's journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights on psychology, the self, and the path of awakening. And if you know someone who feels lost, send this message to them. Because sometimes, just one sentence at the right moment can change an entire life.